Ibrox Park, Glasgow. On the 5th of April, 1902, over 68,000 supporters packed into the stands for the huge Scotland versus England match. The stadium shook with excitement, but beneath the roar of the crowd, something far more dangerous was happening, something no one could see. The West Tribune stand had been constructed only 2 years earlier. It relied on imported American pine, laid across narrow steel trusses. Engineers believed the wood would harden as it dried, becoming stronger with time. But Scotland had been drenched in weeks of cold, relentless rain, water soaked deep into the planks. The timber swelled, softened, and began to rot from the inside. By match day, the structure was unstable, ready to fail. Fans standing on the terrace felt a strange bounce under their feet. A police officer reported strange, unusual vibrations that didn't feel normal. But with the stadium overflowing and anticipation at its peak, nobody imagined the danger inches beneath their feet. With the kickoff, the whole stand began to move in rhythm with the crowd. Thousands stamped and swayed, then leaned forward as one. The pressure mounted with every cheer, until a single, sharp crack tore through the air. A 20-meter section of the stand collapsed without warning. Hundreds were hurled nearly 40 feet onto the running track. Wooden planks, iron supports, and splintered beams rained down on top of them. The sound of breaking wood mixed with terrified screams as the remaining section of the stand shuddered violently. Rescue workers rushed forward over shattered timber and tangled steel. Many of the victims had crushed limbs, broken spines, and serious internal injuries. Chaos, pure, overwhelming. And in one of the most controversial decisions in football history, the match continued. 25 people died and over 500 were injured. The tragedy forced Britain to rethink stadium safety forever. Wooden terraces gave way, inspections became stricter, and the Ibrox collapse would be the permanent reminder of what happens when engineering shortcuts meet massive crowds. Stade Armand Cesare, Bastia. On May 5, 1992, thousands of exuberant supporters flocked to the French Cup semi-final. With demand for tickets skyrocketing, organizers hastily erected a high, temporary stand. Adding nearly 10,000 seats to the capacity construction lasted only 12 days. 12 days. To build a structure meant to hold thousands. Workers immediately noticed problems. Support beams were misaligned. Bolts weren't tight. Entire sections swayed when people walked on them. Warnings were delivered, concerns raised, but profit spoke louder than caution. By early evening, the temporary stand was packed to its limit. Most fans were convinced it was trembling under their feet. They joked about it, but stewards insisted it was perfectly okay. Then, just minutes before kickoff, the stand began shaking violently. There were metallic pops like gunfire. The upper rows shifted, groaned, and then the whole structure collapsed in a horrifying wave of steel, and seats fans fell from heights of as much as 50 feet. Some were buried instantly beneath twisted beams. Others clung to broken railings before falling into the wreckage below. Dust filled the air. Screams erupted across the stadium. Emergency responders tried to reach the victims, but the passages were blocked, the wreckage unstable, and danger still looming as sections continued to creak and bend. Survivors described medics crawling over mangled metal, pulling people out with their bare hands. 19 died. More than 2,300 were injured. The worst stadium disaster in French history investigations uncovered corruption, rushed planning, ignored safety warnings, and negligence at every level. France rewrote its laws about the use of temporary structures, and the 5th of May became a date of remembrance rather than celebration. It remains a brutal reminder that when shortcuts are taken, the crowd pays the price. Luzhniki Stadium, Moscow. On October the 20th, 1982, freezing temperatures settled over the stadium. Concrete steps, railings, and ramps were coated in ice. Nevertheless, over 16,000 loyal supporters came to watch Spartak Moscow play against Harlem. As the match drew to a close, hundreds of fans attempted to avoid the cold by leaving early. They streamed toward a single narrow stairway known as Exit 1. Because the stadium was only partially open that night, all but a few fans were routed through the same narrow, icy corridor. Then Spartak scored a late, unexpected goal. Fans who had been leaving the stadium reversed direction to see what was happening. They ran headlong into the crowd, surging down. Feet flew out from under people on the icy steps. One person fell, and another. In an instant, bodies were piled on top of each other in a crushing, suffocating heap. The police tried to regulate the movement, but in a fatal error, they closed an extra gate further down the passageway. There was no place for the crowd to go. The pressure surged with terrifying speed. The ones at the very bottom were crushed instantly. Those in the middle suffocated. Those at the top could only hear the muffled screams beneath them. Rescue workers had a hard time reaching the victims because the corridor was so jammed. Concrete, steel railings, and bodies pressed together in such a tight squeeze that rescuers were pulling people out one at a time. The official Soviet report claimed 66 deaths, but hospital personnel, eyewitness accounts, and declassified documents indicate the real number could have been more than 340, making it one of the deadliest stadium disasters in Europe. Families searched for answers for years. Many never found them. Luzhniki serves as a grim reminder that crowds freeze, panic spreads, and tragedy becomes impossible to avoid when exits are blocked. Dasharath Stadium, Kathmandu. On the 12th of March, 1988, more than 30,000 spectators packed Nepal's national stadium to witness a major football final. The air was thick with excitement, even as dark storm clouds gathered above. Warning signs were ignored by officials. The match continued. Then, midway through the game, the heavens opened. A violent hailstorm swept in. Ice the size of marbles hammered down on uncovered spectators. People screamed, scrambling for shelter that did not exist. Panic ensued. Thousands raced towards the exits, but the main gates were locked. They had been closed earlier in the day to prevent crowd infiltration, and nobody unlocked them when the storm hit. The crowd surged into the metal barriers with incredible violence. People at the front were crushed. Those behind pushed harder, desperate to be free of the pounding hail. Bodies piled up in the exit tunnels, blocking any hope of movement inside the gate. It became a death trap. People were pressed against the doors, unable even to breathe. Those slipping fell and disappeared under the weight of hundreds pushing from behind. The pressure was so strong that some victims succumbed to asphyxia in a matter of seconds. Witnesses remembered hearing desperate screams, "Open the gate! Open the gate!" But the storm had drowned out their voices. By the time police unlocked the barriers, a wave of bodies spilled outward. Some unconscious. Some were severely injured. Many didn't make it. 93 people died. Hundreds more were hurt. The investigation revealed locked exits, no evacuation plan, and a complete absence of emergency preparation. Dasharath Stadium became a symbol of how quickly panic turns deadly when escape routes are sealed shut. Kayseri Atatürk Stadium, Turkey. On the 17th of September, 1967, a fierce derby match between Kayserispor and Sivasspor filled the stadium with over 20,000 fans. Emotions were running high. Security was at an all-time dangerous low. Tensions exploded in the stands. Insults turned into stone throwing. Fights spread across the terraces. When Kayserispor scored the opening goal, Sivasspor fans panicked, terrified that the rival crowd would retaliate. They surged toward the exits in a frantic wave, but the gates opened inward. The first line of people slammed into the doors with enormous force. Those behind continued pushing, never knowing the disaster forming at the front. The pressure became overwhelming. Barriers buckled, some gates collapsed, others jammed shut. The narrow passageways became death funnels. People were falling and instantly being trampled. Others were crushed against walls and railings, and yet others fainted and disappeared under the crowd. Rescue workers struggled to break through the mass of bodies blocking every path. The mayhem continued outside the stadium as well, where panicked supporters clashed. The medics fought to carry the injured to safety while trying to avoid the ongoing violence. By the end of the night, 43 people were dead, more than 300 injured. The tragedy forced Turkey to overhaul stadium safety, changing how gates were designed, how crowds were managed, and how rival fans were separated. Kayseri remains one of the darkest days in Turkish football. El Espinal, Tolima. On the 26th of June, 2022, thousands filled the city square for a traditional Koraleha festival, a bullfighting celebration held in a monumental wooden arena built exclusively for the event. The three-story structure was held together with timber and rope, and thinly lined with metals. It looked unstable. It was unstable. But it was tradition, and people filled every level. The bull had just charged across the ring and pulled spectators forward onto the edges of the top tiers. The structure shook under their shifting weight. It groaned and creaked, and a few moments later a resounding crack boomed through the arena. Then it all fell apart. A huge outer section of the three-story structure fell straight down, carrying hundreds of people with it. Whole rows dropped in an instant. Dust and splinters filled the air. Screams erupted as beams, planks, and bodies tumbled into the arena floor. The bull was still frightened and loose, running in panic, as would-be rescuers attempting to reach survivors were forced to dodge out of its path. At least 4 to 6 people died, including a child. More than 200 were injured with broken bones, crushed limbs, and severe head wounds. The collapse sparked outrage across the country. The often flimsy construction of arenas like the Koraleha ones was denounced, and their lack of safety standards was brought forward. To many, a tradition could not longer justify such risks. The tragedy demonstrated how quickly a celebration, built on unstable ground, can fall apart, literally and tragically. These 6 disasters, spanning continents, cultures, and over a century, share at their core one haunting reality. When engineering fails, when exits are blocked, when crowds panic, when warnings are ignored, disaster can unfold in seconds. These painful lessons have made modern stadiums much safer today. But history warns us that one little flaw, ignored or unnoticed, can turn a moment of rejoicing into catastrophe.